Cool. So everybody, today I'm speaking with Daniel from the Muslim Sceptic, and we're going to talk about does science and atheism explain the world better than Islam? By the way, Daniel, you've made a great chicken video a few weeks ago, so go check that out. How did you get the idea for the video, by the way, before we get into this
So
topic?
the video is a moral psychology experiment. I read about it in a book called Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. He's a psychologist, pretty prominent at NYU. And he actually did this experiment with college students around the world. And what he was asking them is, he gave them a moral scenario that you have a man who goes to a grocery store, he buys a full chicken from the store, and then he brings it home and he has intercourse with it, basically. And then the experimenters asked the participants, is there anything morally wrong with this, with his actions, his behavior?
Mm-hmm.
How would you characterize it? Is it morally right, morally wrong, morally neutral? And what Haidt discovered is that people who are from Western countries, they'll find it off-putting, but they won't find any moral problem with it. They'll say it's either morally neutral or it might be even morally good, since the man is, just pursuing his sexual freedom or his autonomy. But they won't say it's bad or it's wrong. But people in non-Western countries, they will universally say this is something very wrong. And then in the experiment, they kind of up the ante and ask, well, okay, what if after he has intercourse with the chicken, he cooks it and eats it? And still the Western participants will say, well, it's still the same. There's nothing wrong. But that makes it a lot worse for non-Western participants in this experiment. And the way that Jonathan Haidt explains it, and others who have commented on this and other similar experiments, is that the Western mind is trained to be utilitarian. It's trained to kind of only consider consequences in evaluating moral situations. So when it comes to that chicken, well, no one is getting harmed, right? No one is getting hurt, quote unquote. Therefore, it is not going to be morally wrong. But this is something that's very Western, tends to be like amongst educated Westerners who are more affluent, maybe middle class to upper class. They answer in this kind of way. They actually, again, they find it off-putting, but they don't find a moral problem with it. And it's because they're operating on this idea that harm and, consequences, negative consequences, those are the things that determine what is wrong or right. And the way that is explained in terms of moral psychology is that people operating in other parts of the world operate with a much more rich, or more broad, more expansive moral intuitions that they have. Because if you ask, children before they're kind of acculturated, they also tend to have these kinds of responses that are not purely consequentialist, utilitarian, harm-based. They also have those kinds of reactions. So it seems to be like humans have certain universal intuitions about morality. Like certain things are just disgusting and that makes them wrong, or certain actions are, going to go contrary to certain relationships or rights within a relationship. And even if your pleasure increases or there's an overall net benefit, it's still wrong because you've violated a relationship, and that is inherently wrong. So, I mean, the whole point is that you have this much broader moral psychology based on intuitions, but in the West, this kind of, due to various factors, that different psychologists will explain, a lot of those intuitions are kind of muted and silenced, and they're suppressed, and only like a utilitarian harm principle type of mentality is allowed. And so this is why you see such a huge discrepancy in the West versus the rest. And when we're talking about the rest, it's not like one religion, it's like a lot of different religions, a lot of different cultures, but they universally will react the same way to that scenario. So why? And I mean, this is an interesting question. So for
So
moral psychology and just comparative religion, and looking at atheism too, because atheists tend to be these kinds of analytic thinkers who are hyper analytic maybe, and they really focus on this question of harm and consequences. Therefore, a lot of religious beliefs and a religious morality just doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't compute. Like, why would that be wrong? There's really nothing wrong with it. The only reason that you find it wrong is because you are suffering from superstitions. But in reality, a lot of some of these religious practices and moral beliefs are based on universal intuitions that everyone has, but the atheists have just suppressed, unconsciously, their, or through culture or through education, those parts of their minds have been suppressed.
right. So they didn't think that something is wrong with a chicken because they were just using the moral, some consequentialist kind of framework without looking into this intuition, right? Because you explained that there are two types of morality, and according to their type, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, you can go as far as saying like incest isn't wrong because essentially you're increasing the pleasure of both human beings. If they agree to do it, then there's nothing wrong with it from that perspective. So basically, they disregard the other type of morality. That's what you're saying, right? I guess.
They don't. It's not something conscious.
Yeah.
And you can see in the video, because we're basically running the same experiment on video, on camera, with college students who are just on campus walking around,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see that they want to say that it's wrong. They really want to say it, a lot of them, but they stop themselves, like they hold themselves back, because their brain is like thinking about it,
Yeah.
and trying to, if they, why, like, if I say that this is morally wrong, well, why is it morally wrong? And the only valid reason something can be wrong is if someone is harmed.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of put in this kind of paralysis,
Yeah.
where they want to say that it's wrong, but they can't, because their moral psychology can't compute that as being wrong. But it's because they are operating with a very specific, and kind of like an engineered moral psychology
Mm-hmm.
that's very different than the vast majority of the world, and
Yeah.
historically as well.
Yeah. It sounds very artificial because if you ask any children or even me when I was growing up, I was like 7 years old, I would say that's gross. Like there's nothing to think about. Like it's disgusting. Um, it's just like a human impulse, right? So they're kind of trying to get rid of this natural impulse. And I mean, when I was an atheist, I wasn't that far, so I wouldn't go at this far. But I can imagine that people nowadays they tend to overthink even basic intuitions.
Yeah, they have to put things in these consequentialist terms, but morality is, our moral intuitions are much broader. Like, consequential is part of our morality. It's also a part of religious morality and Islamic morality, but it's just one part. And there are all these other moral intuitions that people have, like, for example, a respect for authority. This is something that you find in many different cultures, and then also in religion as well. Like, if someone is in an authority position because he is older, or he has attained some kind of rank socially, then he deserves respect, and even obedience. And this is also like something that's morally intuitive. But if you're coming from purely a consequentialist, that doesn't make sense. Like, why would you have any kind of moral obligation towards a figure, like, no matter how authoritative he is? But again, this is something that's found in many cultures universally, and even in children. Like, they will run different experiments that will show that even children from a very young age have this kind of, they just want to obey authority. And so you can say that this is something intuitive, it's something that's natural. And when you think about God and obedience to God, like, God is the ultimate authority. And therefore, like, just by the nature of God and our position as human beings, there's going to be a certain relationship there of obedience. And that's a logic that is found in many religions. It's very clear in Islam, but it's something that just won't make sense if you have this kind of Western educated mentality, or this Western educated psychology. Why should I care? God exists, okay, or I can concede that he exists, but what does that have to do with me?
Yeah.
What kind of obligation would I have just because God is all powerful? Well, okay, maybe I don't want to obey God.
Hmm.
So this is a very strange, unintuitive response when you compare it to the rest of the world.
Yeah. I don't know if you know the TV show called Brave New World. Have you heard about it?
Is it based on the book?
I guess it kind of is, but it's now on Netflix, and I just watched a couple of episodes. And basically, it's like 200 years in the future, and there are no countries. There's just a global superstate, and people take pills every 15 minutes to increase their happiness. And women don't give birth anymore. There is no prison, so no punishment ever happens. There are no murders, nothing. But everybody's there's no monogamy also, so everybody's just pursuing sex all the time. Any free time they have, they're just engaged in sex. And it was really strange when I was looking at the show, like, okay, like, this is actually where this can lead. Like, this sort of thinking isn't, it's maybe now people looking at it can see like, okay, this can never happen. But if you really think about it, like, where is the line between, if you take your worldview as atheism, so essentially everything is meaningless, and you just want to increase your pleasure, how do you then tie it back to morality? Like, how do you, I don't know, how do these atheists then continue to live in the future, right? They have to improve their society, they have to improve the industries and everything to lower the amount of burden they have to deal with every day when it comes to traffic, when it comes to everything. And then what's left to do when it's only to indulge in this world they built, right? Is there any other scenario? I mean, this is like very, I think, possible. I'm not saying this is gonna happen, but I don't know if it's based on the book, but maybe um, have you heard about this Brave New World?
Yeah, that's exactly what the book is about.
Hmm.
But it's the point of the book is to show how people can be enslaved by a pursuit of happiness and a pursuit of desire, and you just have to be careful what you wish for, because if being human and there's no meaning to life, the only purpose that you have is to increase your pleasure, then you can easily imagine pharmaceuticals being used to pump dopamine into the brain and to constantly produce that feeling of euphoria or physical pleasure. And when you have that kind of understanding of that's what it means to be human, or that's what really the goal is of being alive, is just to be happy and experience this kind of physical pleasure, then that seems to be the natural consequence. Like, the technology will be developed, and you can even be hooked up into a kind of virtual reality where all of your physical pleasures are being constantly met. But I think what's obvious to anyone who's watching that show or reading the book is that that's really a dystopia. That's really the end of humanity. It's something that's very clearly off-putting and inhuman. And why? But the question is, why would that be inhuman? Everyone is happy. Everyone is enjoying themselves, himself, herself. And what can we point to that is actually wrong with that scenario? And if you're not, if you are again Western educated or atheist, it's going to be very hard for you to say what is wrong with that kind of scenario. What's wrong with that kind of world? All right,
Mhm.
what would you say to that?
What would I say? Man, I mean, I don't know. If they don't have this worldview that we have, it would be difficult. I would probably have to question them on just them learning that they are actually soul, like that they are not just a physical body, but stripping them away from all their physical attributes and then asking them who they really are. And then if they don't believe that there's a difference between them and then let's say something that doesn't have a biological life, and what is that difference? And then from there, maybe maybe I will have to establish that they have to have a there's a distinct difference between a human being and or something that's alive and something that isn't alive. And there's also some morality that comes to it if they accept the concept of God. But I mean, this would be a long discussion. I don't know what to say if they don't accept that premise. Yeah.
Well, you could say, well, the soul, that's a great starting point. There's so much to being human, like
Yeah.
having a purpose, having a dream, having a vision for what you want in your life, having something that is greater than yourself,
Mm.
and greater than physical pleasure. Like that's something that is so important to being human, that you are willing to pursue these kinds of higher ends that are greater than yourself. You're willing to sacrifice yourself for this higher purpose. Those are things that are contrary to your personal pleasure, but they're still worth pursuing because they mean more. They have that kind of transcendent value. And that's something that is lost in this kind of brave new world. And then also the value of relationships and the value of love, that's more than just physical, because so much of what love is, true love between a man and a woman, is on the basis of sacrifice and on the basis of you have spent years, with your wife, and you have experienced so much together. You have gone through so much pain together, so much joy together. You help each other, and you often will sacrifice your personal pleasure for the sake of for your spouse. And that's maybe why divorce is on such a increase in the modern world, because of the individualism and selfishness of the brave new world. But how about any of these kinds of human relationships would would not exist in a brave new world, because for example, a parent-child relationship, to take care of your children requires a lot of struggle, a lot of effort, a lot of work. Why would you do that if you're just purely self pleasure focused? You wouldn't. And that's why also fertility rates have plummeted. People are not having children. And in some countries, governments have to have programs to incentivize having children, because no one wants to have children. It's just too much of a burden. And you've been programmed to be just concerned with your own self pleasure. So this is a dystopia is being created. Like, it's a brave new world as a fictional story, but this is very close to the reality that we currently live. Like in the novel, it's called Soma, that's the pill. But
Mm-hmm.
you have all kinds of antidepressants that are being prescribed in large quantities to the population. Like they tested the water supplies in the sewer systems, and there's just a very high level of traces of antidepressants in the sewers because people are urinating it out. And it's crazy because it means that so much of the population is being, held up by a thread, basically. They need pharmaceuticals to be able to function. So we are living the brave new world.
Yeah, I remember they couldn't figure out in that Brave New World why you shouldn't be sleeping with everybody, because in their kind of worldview you were prohibiting to enjoy, because everybody was like one social body. So it wasn't like you can just be by yourself and have privacy. No, you have to like enjoy everybody, and everybody has a right to enjoy you. So yeah, it's pretty messed up. And I don't know if you've heard about this actually crazy story from Texas. This young boy, two boys who killed their family, and they actually posted a letter after this murder happened and the suicide. And that's exactly what he was saying in the letter. I actually made a video on it. And he says that he realized that consciousness is a byproduct of evolution, and that the only reason for living is to increase his happiness. And he's depressed, therefore he wants to kill himself, but he would cause harm to his family. They would be sad. So therefore he has to kill them as well to end their sadness in the future. And this is how he justified killing his parents, his, I think, grandmother, and uh, a bunch of other people. So yeah, that's pretty messed up.
Yeah, so that's pure consequentialist reasoning.
And the worst thing is
Utilitarianism.
he was a Muslim. I think his parents were Muslim. Yeah,
Yeah,
he was
so
like
very
15 or
sad.
16.
Yeah, it's very sad, but this is exactly the type of mentality that is produced by Western thought, Western education, this kind of liberal secular morality that prioritizes the individual and individual pleasure. If that is the only purpose of life, as they will teach, and is implicit in so much of the culture and the entertainment content that is people are consuming, if people are indoctrinated into that, then you will see more killing, you will see more suicide, you will see because there's really not much value for life, you'll see more mass shootings, you'll see all of this kind of sociopathic behavior because the mind has been mutilated, the psychology has been mutilated, and people really, it's like a massive social experiment that's being conducted on the population of Western countries. We are more isolated than ever. We are not marrying at the same rate as the past. Sexual behavior is becoming more and more unrestricted. We are pumping children full of uh, TV content, internet content, YouTube content, increase in pornography. It's just all of these massive changes that are happening in the span of only, less than 2 decades. I think the internet really took off around 2004, 2005. So it's been 15 years of just a social experiment. I mean, the experiment goes further back, but it's been accelerated now in the past 15 years, and I think we're seeing a lot of shocking things happening that we wouldn't expect.
Yeah. Yeah, I just spoke with Haley McNamara, who's like the head of National Center for Sexual Exploitation, and she's suing Pornhub. And basically, they figured out that almost 80% of content there was unverified, and there were cases of rape and child molestation. And people were reporting to Pornhub that, hey, I'm recorded here, and people are watching it. It's being recommended, and I want to take it down, but the Pornhub wouldn't take it down for years. And I think she mentioned over 93% of boys before the age of 15 watch, I don't know, a bunch of pornographic movies. And if I think back like 20 years ago, when I was in puberty, let's say, then it wasn't this rampant. So I maybe watched like one movie when I was lucky, and the whole, like, we had a high school and like 30 boys, we watched one movie, and this was like the pinnacle of some sexual exploitation, but not exploitation, exploration, let's say. But now, like, when you're 16, you already watched like 5,000 movies, and it's proven through research that when you start with like something normal, let's say, and normal porn, you will eventually, it will grow into crazy proportions, and you might even end up changing your sexuality from watching heterosexual to homosexual porn and going further, because nothing can then satisfy your lust. And then you're kind of destroying the families. If you're a father of the family, your wife cannot satisfy your desires anymore. So yeah, it's pretty crazy that Pornhub, that's actually like a bigger scandal than the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing, but no one is paying attention to it. Like, thousands of millions of people, and nothing is happening, like, because you have to admit that just having porn online is unnatural, and they don't want to go there, so they just say no, just a little bit is fine, but that little bit always grows, and people are never satisfied with just a little bit. So anyways, just wanted to mention that as well, that I see that as a huge problem.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. It's very shocking, and what you see with your eyes affects your heart. It affects your mind. It affects your soul, and people are being destroyed by this kind of stuff. And I mean, things that are pornographic are not just on Pornhub or these porn websites,
Yeah.
because there's so much pornographic content that's just out in public when it comes to billboards and advertisements, and showing pictures of women or men even in these kinds of sexually explicit images and videos. So when I was growing up, we had a TV, and if you have a TV, there are TV shows that were sexually explicit, like men
Mm-hmm.
and women. There wasn't any nudity, but it's still like a sexual scenario. And advertisements as well, like commercials on TV, like you couldn't avoid, like advertisements showing women in various states of nakedness or undress, and that's pornographic as well. And you're just bombarded with it, and it's a disease because like you said, people will become uh, any amount is bad, but the access creates a kind of addiction. It creates a kind of dependence, and it saps people's energy and it saps people's motivation. So you have these teenage boys, that they have no motivation to do anything because they're just spending hours and hours in front of a computer or a tablet, or they're using their smartphone, and they just can't stop. So
Mm-hmm.
there was a state in the US that declared it as a public health crisis, like pornography is a public health crisis. And this was Arizona. But it's like chickens coming home to roost, because you have an entire sexualized culture. So only now you're addressing the problem when it has reached a certain height where you can't ignore it anymore. And that's just one state. As you said, many places they're just completely ignoring the problem, and it's going to lead to the destruction, or has led to the destruction of millions of lives.
Yeah, I think she even said that the addiction from porn is much worse than from drugs because it's biological. So you're born with this predisposition to procreate, or it's basically you're simulating it in front of your screen. And yeah, it's not like drugs because it's built artificially, but this is something you can't avoid, and people have much bigger problems getting off this after, let's say, 15 years of watching it. To really stop is I think she mentioned the case where the cocaine addict who said that quitting cocaine was much easier than quitting porn. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. Um, and yeah, if you think about this existential meaninglessness that the culture and people and everybody promotes, it's like that will just make you depressed. Like, how can, if you have that as a worldview, which I used to live in, how can that not make you depressed? What what is the point of your life? If you think about it deeply, except your maybe career or your family, what why do you wake up every day from the bed, like, and you're even convinced of it, and you're making comedy shows. Every comic nowadays is making jokes about religion, and it's just like a norm to be atheist, or to have this meaningless attitude towards life. But this didn't used to be like that, like 100 years ago. No one was behaving like this, that they would be promoting this meaninglessness. Do you have any thoughts on that, or the how the culture affects this?
Yeah, it's almost like if you believe in something, then you're kind of someone to laugh at, or you're pathetic. Oh,
Yeah.
look at him. He actually believes something. He actually cares about something. So I think a lot of popular culture has adopted that kind of meaninglessness, or a kind of aversion to meaning, because it's not just me. You don't. There's no meaning, but you also have an aversion. Like, you are actively against anyone else
Yeah.
finding meaning. You want to just mock it, and it's you can find it in a lot of uh, content and entertainment, where uh, being someone who believes something, whether it's religion or anything else, makes you it makes you the butt of the joke.
Mhm.
So this is something that I don't know where it's coming from, and why this is something that is so heavily promoted. But I've definitely noticed it as well. It's kind of a cynicism uh, against the truth. Like, why should we even talk about the truth? Why should we even care about the truth? It's something that is not even worth talking about. And if you are engaged in talking about the truth, then you're wasting your time. You're making a fool out of yourself. It's like how we read in the Quran how disbelievers would mock the messengers, and they would mock the
Mhm.
believers, and they would say, like, oh, you're just, these are just stories, you're just, lying, you're making up myths, and we're not going to waste our time with this, we have more important things to do. So I think a lot of precedent for this kind of attitude, but today it's just everything is on steroids. So
Yeah.
everything is taken up to another notch in terms of mockery, and but you find the roots of it mentioned in the Quran. It's kind of like a disbelieving mentality.
Yeah. Yeah, if you think about Islam is all about also supernatural things, that you can't just justify with science. So some things are outside of science, and I think people have a hard time to reconcile those things. And this tend to be the main source of doubt for many born Muslims or people who are considering Islam, because um, they can't really grasp the the I don't know, the, how would I call this, the weight of the Quran and the Sunnah and everything. Like, if you just look at the splitting of the moon miracle or some other things, and then all the other supernatural concepts. But so, what do you think is this? Uh, do you believe there can be a reconciliation between within Islam? When you look at these, let's say, supernatural things, um, and then science, like, do you think they can ever like come together, or it's basically never going to happen, probably?
No, it's never going to happen, because science is not the only exclusive source of knowledge
Mhm.
and truth about the world. So science, we can concede that science can discover certain things about the world around us. There are certain facts that are empirical that you can observe. That's one source of knowledge, but there are many other important sources of knowledge that are not empirical, such as reason, like the what in Arabic is called aql, and what in Islam in the Quran is called aql, meaning your sense of reason. And the Quran, Allah is constantly appealing to our aql. Aren't you people who have reason? Aren't you people who reflect and think? And that's appealing to our minds, our rational capacity as a source of truth, as a way to discover the truth. So that's separate from science, and you're never going to meld the two. They're just separate. There are certain things that are accessible to science and empirical observation that are not accessible to reason, and vice versa.
But if
There's
the
all
yeah, I was just wondering if the atheists say that, well, science is the only measuring stick and only the empirical things matter. All the other things are, not the absolute truth that we consider to be true as atheists. Is there anything you could say to those
can
guys?
you justify that? Because the claim that science is the only truth, that is a non-empirical claim itself. So this is the well-known self-defeating nature of that kind of statement, that kind of uh, totalizing statement about the authority of science. Science is the only truth. Okay, well, that statement, that claim is not scientific itself. That's you're
Yeah.
making a very strong metaphysical claim. So it's self-defeating. Like and there are so many things that we experience and we operate under in our discourse that has nothing to do with science. Like when we talk about other people as people, a person is a non-scientific entity, because from an empirical scientific point of view, you're just cells that you're made of material things, you're a collection of atoms, you're a collection of electrical signals.
Mhm.
So to call you a person, you're going a way above the empirical nature of the body. You're creating this idea, this metaphysical idea of a person who has rights, who has belief and has personhood. All of these things are assumed by even an atheistic morality. Those are non-empirical. Those are all non-empirical. So it doesn't really hold water. Atheists might be saying that the only truth is science and what we can observe,
Yeah.
but everything else that is part of their worldview and their psychology belies or contradicts that statement.
Mhm.
But yeah, there are all kinds of other sources. There's reason, there's empiricism, there's also intuitions. Like human
Intuitions, yeah.
beings have all kinds of intuitions about the world and the way that it works they're unconscious, but they're still operating, like certain moral beliefs. Like you can ask children at a very young age if, I push or if a boy pushes a girl roughly off of a swing, is that something that's right or wrong? And all children from 2 years of age will say that that's wrong. They will universally say that. So how do they know that? Where do they get that knowledge
Mhm.
from? Knowledge about even like being able to create concepts. That's intuitive. Like that's when you look at all different cultures, there are certain concepts that appear throughout all these cultures universally. Why? Like, for example, being a mom, like the concept of mom, motherhood, concept of fatherhood, the concept of a tree. Why would that be universal? The concept of water, and water having certain purifying qualities. Those are all universal. Where do they come from? If we're just a product of evolution and we're the product of certain cultures, then why would there be these kinds of universal beliefs that are shared, these universal intuitions that are shared? So there
Mhm.
seems to be something that is um, attaching to the real world. Like because everyone is on the same page from childhood on these kinds of issues. And then also tradition is a big source of knowledge Islamically, and we find this prior to modernity, that knowledge, a lot of what is considered to be knowledge is inherited from previous generations. Like you learn um, so much about the world and about how to conduct yourself in that world from your elders or from your parents or from a passed on tradition. And tradition is important because that's what gives you so much of the knowledge that you need and truth that you need to operate. But modernity kind of and the atheistic worldview shut that down and said that no, you can't trust what other people say, and you have everything has to be evaluated and scrutinized on the basis of science and reason. Tradition is something that is backwards. It will hold you back. It's completely invalid, and that's what Descartes mainly was doing. That when he in the meditations, like he's primarily concerned about doubting everything. You doubt everything, and you can only start with "I think, therefore I am." That's the only indubitable truth according to him. But you see how this kind of reduces everything and destroys everything. All these other sources of knowledge are flattened and done away with by Descartes' kind of move. And this is the start of modernism, is creating this doubt in all sources of knowledge. And when you go to college philosophy classes, Philosophy 101, that's primarily what they want to do. Is they want to teach you Descartes and teach you to mistrust everything other than your reason. But it's not clear that reason can operate separate from all these other sources of knowledge. It's kind of like a network of knowledge, holistic knowledge that works together, and that allows you to understand the world around you. And if you try to lock one aspect, then you're going to get a kind of almost like mental retardation. Like you're going to have a kind of autistic view of the world, because one major part of your mentality and your psychology and understanding the world around you, your epistemology, has been shut down. So that's not to say that your reason can't be wrong, your empirical knowledge can't go wrong, your tradition, it might be a false tradition that you're following, um, and then also your intuitions might be somehow misfiring, misfunctioning. So that can all happen, but you kind of have the resources to correct and to find the truth. And that as human beings, that's our whole purpose. Like we are driven towards wanting to know reality, wanting to find the truth, and we've been given the tools and the capacity to do so. That's God-given capacity to search for the truth and to find the truth and discover the truth.
Yeah. I'm just reading Al Ghazali's book. I'm not sure what the name is, but he's going in depth into this concept of who actually are you, and just stripping away everything. And you're left with this kind of heart, and then he goes into like a comparison between like what does it actually mean? What's your heart? Who are you? And what are your desires? And what's your angelistic side? What's your let's say bestial side? And it's pretty interesting as well. Especially I think it was written like 1,000 years ago. So that's pretty cool as well. I think the main point of the atheists would be that they claim that they are free thinkers. So what they can do, they can just adjust their position anytime. They can change whatever view they have anytime based on the evidence. And our kind of problem is that we're stuck. We can't change because you're in religion. You can't move with the flow. You're stuck in your position. You have to always justify your position, because you have to follow probably how the world goes with science or whatever. Do you have any sort of thoughts around that? Like, because I think being a free thinker is actually easier than to have a solid position in something. But what do you think? Like,
No, I agree completely. It's very interesting how all the free thinkers happen to agree on 99% of everything. And they all happen to agree with the popular culture and what is politically correct. All of these free thinkers that supposedly are, so unhindered by anything, yet they all happen to agree. Like, it's like
mhm,
people who claim that, oh, I dress however I want. I'm free to dress, in whatever fashion, whatever style. But then you look at all of these people and they're all dressed exactly the same.
yeah,
Why? I thought you were so free and you're so unbounded in your fashion sense, but you just happen to dress exactly the way that everyone else is dressing. It shows that your mentality is one of just following. You are not thinking freely. You are just following whatever is trendy. You're following whether it's conscious or unconscious. You are just following the beaten path.
but they think
And
it's like progress. It's going somewhere. But what if it's not, right? What if
yeah, where's the
just,
proof of that?
yeah,
Look at what we're saying about Brave New World. Like, where's the progress? All we're seeing is human dysfunction and destruction. So this is where the free thinking has led humanity. What does that say about free thinking?
yeah. And Allah says in the Quran a lot of times where he mentions like, look at what happened to people before you. Look at the empires we destroyed before you, and what they were doing when we sent the messengers then there, and they were like engaging in, I don't know, homosexuality. And we told them like this is not good, and then we destroyed them. And so like, where is this progress? If you claim that everything old is bad, because like Islam is old, so therefore it doesn't apply nowadays. Well, how old is this concept of homosexual behavior in the society? It's pretty ancient, and in Rome it was also pretty prevalent. So where is this progress? Like, you're progressing somewhere where we already been 1,000 years ago. So yeah, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
And,
that's a great example.
and I think one of these famous atheists, he mentioned that now he's very inclined to believe in the multiverse theory, and he gave his reasons why. But they are completely, there's no empirical claim for his theory. Like, there's the multiverse theory is not accepted by scientists at all, in terms of like the whole majority of them does not agree on it, and he's just going with it. And but before that, he's claiming that, with everything can be explained through natural selection. Basically, everything in the world can be explained through evolution and natural selection, and through these random mutations in biology. But how do you explain going from chemistry, so you have a chemical soup, and then moving into biology and life, in the beginning of how the life was created according to evolution? How is it possible to go from chemistry, something that's chemistry, to biology? I mean, you've studied physics, I think, but do you have any thoughts on this whole evolution and natural selection process?
No, it's all nonsense. Evolutionary theory, natural selection, it's all nonsense. It's something that, especially, I mean, the most nonsensical aspect is going from chemistry to biology, like the formation of the amino acids coming together to form proteins. This is something that is impossible to happen naturally. It doesn't matter if you have 100 billion years, which is 10 times the about 10 times the age of the universe. Even if you have 100 billion years, that's not enough time for random processes
Mhm.
to come and form even the most basic proteins. Not even We're not even talking about DNA. We're not even talking about a molecule. We're not talking about a cell. We're talking about the most fundamental building block is so complex that the folding of the protein, mathematically, the probability is many times multiples of the age of the universe. And a lot of mathematicians have commented on this, atheist mathematicians. So you have people like David Galertner, who is a computer scientist at Yale, who came together with another mathematician from Princeton, Michael Berlinski. I believe he's from Princeton, and another PhD from Oxford. And they're talking about the mathematical likelihood of evolution occurring. And it's a mathematical fantasy. Like, the only way that you can convince people that this is possible is if they're ignorant of math and they're ignorant of probability, and they're ignorant about how the probabilities involved with basic molecular processes. And there's another guy who I often recommend. His name is James Tour, and he's a professor of Rice University, one of the top research universities in the US. And he's published hundreds of articles on synthetic chemistry. And his whole job is to create synthetic molecules in the laboratory. And he, at one point had this challenge. It's a still standing challenge. He said that anyone who can explain to me how you can get biology from chemistry, I'll give you a prize, basically. He said that he would go to chemists and evolutionary biologists, and he would ask them, like, please explain to me how this works, because I'm a synthetic chemist, so I know what it takes to create molecules from nothing. I know what it takes and how difficult that is, and the kind of artificial constraints that you have to put in a laboratory to be able to do that. So please explain to me how this can happen naturally. And he says that a lot of people that he would ask, they would privately tell him that we don't know. We actually don't know how it works, but they're not willing to say that publicly because there's a lot of public pressure, and you will be seen as kind of anti-science and anti-materialism if you come out with that. So from what I've investigated, I do have a training in physics. I can read scientific papers and be able to evaluate them. And it's very clear that no one has a clear answer to these kinds of questions, even when it comes to natural selection and macro evolution. When it comes to, like, how can you get a four-legged creature from something with fins and something that's in the sea? How can you get lungs, for example, out of gills? How does that actually happen? Like, what kind of process is there? So the natural selection explanation that you just will have mutations that will be selected by the environment, that really doesn't make sense, because half a lung or like half of a heart is not really a functioning heart. It's not something that is going to increase fitness. So how do you really go through those steps to get to these major changes in organisms' biology to create a new species? And you just have a lot of hand waving. You have a lot of amongst evolutionary biologists that, yeah, of course this can happen. We can see microevolution, where there are small changes that will happen in the laboratory. You can actually observe it. It's like, okay, big deal. Like, people have been observing microevolution for literally millennia, thousands of years. Why? Because human beings have been doing agriculture and living in agrarian society for thousands of years, and they know how to domesticate certain animals. Certain species can be domesticated. Certain species can be bred. You can breed them to, manifest, certain traits. Like, you want cows that produce more milk. So take the cows that are very, they produce a lot of milk, and breed them or their children. And people have known how to get these kinds of uh, traits through artificial selection. They select them, I mean, as farmers or as breeders. So that's something that's been known for thousands of years. But the next step of, okay, what about macroevolution? What about big changes that will actually create a new species? These are big, big question marks. And the only thing that evolutionists can say is just to repeat their talking points, like, oh, just give it enough time. If you have enough time, then anything is possible. Anything, but this is anti-rational. This is contrary to sense and reason. Like, you have to actually show me. And another great book is by Thomas Nagel. He wrote the book Mind and Cosmos. And he's an atheist. He's like he says it very explicitly. I'm an atheist, and this makes no sense. If we want to be atheists and be taken seriously, we have to address this problem of evolution and consciousness. Like, how does consciousness come about in an unconscious universe?
Yeah.
How is that possible? So he really is struggling as an atheist with these kinds of big philosophical problems, and he goes off on evolution. He says evolution is not an explanation; it's the lack of an explanation.
Yeah. I mean, how can you get consciousness, which is your first person experience, from natural selection, from nothing, from just nothing? You're getting this consciousness which cannot be even looked at in the lab. People can't see it. It's not something, but we feel it. Everybody has it. How do you get it from just randomness? It's, I can't see it, to be honest.
Yeah, and a lot of people can't see it. The only people who can see it are the ones who just accept what.
Who maybe say, well, the consciousness doesn't exist. It's just your mind. Like, just ignore your mind. That's irrelevant. You're just molecules in the space floating around. Like, all your experiences that you have or your instincts, this is just your mind. So there is no consciousness. I think there's one atheist who has a book on that.
Yeah, you have atheists like Daniel Dennett who will deny consciousness. They say consciousness doesn't exist. Fine, but the body exists. How do you explain that? How do you explain, these multicellular or single cell life coming from nothing, from inorganic matter? How does that happen? Explain that. And they can't do it. They can't. They can just say, "Oh, well, it's just a lot of time has passed, and anything is possible if you have enough time." But that's a non-explanation. That's very weak.
Yeah, he's using his consciousness to tell us that we don't have consciousness. That's funny. Maybe one thing before we go, I guess nowadays online there are big groups of Muslims, ex-Muslims, and this Christian Prince. I don't even know. There's so many these small groups of people who are attacking each other, and one group comes with like an evidence, the other refutes it, then another video pops up to refute that refutation, and it just goes on forever. And I remember like a year ago when I just joined this community, just started to watch some videos, I was very confused, like, what are these people talking about? I don't understand anything, and I'm not really like concerned about it, because I think it's like a very small ecosystem of people, but majority of people don't really like want to get involved in these debates. What do you think people, like, if they are interested in Islam? Now it's very difficult because online you can type in anything about Islam. You have a bunch of ex-Muslims, then you have to find the people like yourself or somebody who debated them or who refuted their claims. Then you have to verify them, and then somebody comes up with some hadith and starts reciting it, and then you have to go and do your research because you can't find any videos or something, and it gets really tiring for people, especially these new readers like myself, let's say. So what do you think, I mean, about this entire ecosystem now that's kind of growing on YouTube or on these social media, and where do you see it going, like in the future?
It seems to be like a big source of content. So as long as people can monetize it, their videos on YouTube, then it's probably not going to see the end of it very soon. Yeah, I think that the amount of videos will just continue to increase, but the level of like the novelty will decrease because there's only so many arguments. And I think that what I'm trying to do in this kind of fray is to say that, look, there's so much scrutiny being placed on Quran and Hadith and Islam in general. And this is not really fair. Why can't we put more scrutiny towards these other religions like Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism and Hinduism? Like, why don't we see like all of these videos that you're talking about, refutation, counter refutation, focusing on Islam, like all of this attention? There's not a similar ecosystem for Hinduism.
Yeah.
There's not a similar ecosystem for Buddhism. Why? Or Judaism? Why? Why are these religions not being attacked, or why is there not as much attention being paid on to these religions? And I think there are several reasons for that. One, I think that Islam is just a very more powerful religion. Like, it's more convincing to people, and people convert to Islam more than some of these other religions. And so that makes Islam more of a threat to the modern world order. So there's a lot more emphasis on trying to refute Islam and trying to make Islam look like it's irrational. Whereas Buddhism, like, if you scrutinize Buddhist texts and you look at their religious beliefs, like, it's a joke. Like, I don't, I want to say no offense. I don't care if anyone is offended by that, but it's just nonsense. But people, there's not like any scrutiny on it. Hinduism, like on MuslimSceptic.com, we have all a series of articles just looking at Hindu texts and what they actually have in their sacred scriptures, and it's a joke. Like, it's not only a joke; a lot of it is quite disgusting and shocking, actually. So why isn't there any discussion about Hinduism? It's because no one is really becoming Hindu. Like, no one. I've yet to meet, actually, literally in my whole life, someone who said, "Yeah, I was really searching for the truth, and I happened to read,
Yeah.
some of the Vedas, and I realized that this is the truth. God has spoken to me." I've never met someone like that. So that's not like, whereas people who convert to Islam, it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of people that are converting to Islam, and the numbers are always going to be disputed because it's so politicized. But Islam does have this kind of threat to the modern world, and it gives an alternative vision for life and how to live, and it conflicts a great deal with um, a lot of the modern project that different states are trying to implement. So you have a lot, like France, for example, that has a big problem with its Muslim population because they will not assimilate. The UK as well, the Canada as well, the US as well. They want Muslims to assimilate, and they're not, or it's slower than they want. Unfortunately, it is happening, but it's slower than other populations. So there's like more of an effort, more money being spent to create content, videos that are attacking Islam. So as long as there are Muslims around, there's going to be content that's going to be attacking Islam. And my strategy personally, and with what I'm working on with my team, is to, okay, let's even the playing field a little bit. You want to have this kind of hyper analysis of Islam? We can have a hyper analysis of Hinduism. Let's look at these texts and let's see, like, in comparison, if you're fair and you really have a problem with XYZ, then why don't you have a problem with Judaism? Why don't you have a problem with Buddhism? Why don't you have a problem with Hinduism? Why is the focus constantly on Muslims and Islam when our bad, not bad because it's just non-liberal, basically. Anything that's non-liberal, non-feminist is bad. So they try to surface all of these hadith and all of these verses of the Quran. Okay, you want to look at non-liberal religion? Let's look at what Judaism has to say about like sex with 3-year-olds. Let's look at what Judaism has to say about non-Jews and the treatment of non-Jews. Like, why don't we have a careful analysis of the Talmud and what the Talmud has to say about non-Jews? I think it's highly non-liberal. Why is that not being discussed? Why don't we see videos on that, ex-Jews talking about the Talmud? We don't see that. Where are the videos? Where are the videos on that? And then Jews can have counter refutation. And where are the videos? Where's the ecosystem on that?
Yeah, I don't think
Why?
there's too many of them.
Yeah,
Maybe.
why? Well, why not with Hindus? Like, where is all of that content? No, we have to just focus on Islam, constantly attack Islam, constantly attack Muslims. And Muslims should take this as a point of pride, because it means that we're on the truth and they can't stand it. So they're all ganging up, right? You have Zionists who are ganging up. You have all these Christian groups that are ganging up. You have Hindutva, like these Hindu nationalists who are ganging up on Muslims. You have Buddhists who are ganging up on Muslims, ganging up on Islam. All of these groups, why? Well, that's because we're special. That's because we're special. And you have, like, this is the last stand. Like, Muslims are the last stand against this onslaught of modernity. All of these other religions, they've reformed. They've accepted everything, basically, that the modern world has dictated, that all of these secular states have dictated. They've accepted it for the most part, and they've reformed, and Muslims are the last holdout. So that's, they're jealous. What can we say?
Oh, yeah, I truly believe that, especially looking at Christianity, where I come from, it doesn't exist. It's a joke now. It's just Christmas holidays, and even when people claim they're Christian, they actually don't know what they're saying. They don't even believe in anything in Christianity. Um, like I was telling my mom, like I have to fast during Ramadan. I can't drink water, and she was like, "Well, you can still drink it. Just don't let anyone see you." And I'm like, "But I believe in God. Like He will see me." And she was like, "Well," she couldn't compute. Like what? I'm like,
Yeah.
no, this is the belief. This is how strong Islam is. Like, I'm not. It's not a joke. Like when I was a Christian, I could like smoke and drink, and I wasn't worried because I'm not really that convinced that this is the truth. But with Islam, it's like, no, I'm careful with my actions, and it's not like somebody. Of course, I can drink. I can disobey anyone. I don't have to do anything. I can do anything I want. But since I believe in God, I believe in Quran, and I believe in these things, therefore I can't act in other manner that would be like, I mean, difficult for my well-being, I guess. So yeah, just people can't wrap their head around why Muslims do what they do. Why are they so like addicted, not addicted, attached to the faith? Because I don't see it anywhere, this sort of attachment, like praying 5 times a day. I thought this will be very difficult, but now it's like second nature. 4 months in, and I haven't missed a single salat. And it's like, it's not that difficult. I don't see any problem with it. Like, it just people perceive it as like, oh, this is so difficult what you guys do, like Ramadan, not eating, fasting, no porn, no nothing. Like, how are you living your life? It's just simple.
Yeah, mashallah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful message, beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy out there. But yeah, thank you, Daniel, for stopping by. We had quite a nice chat, and I know you probably have to go. I have 1 more hour until I break my fast. But thank you for spending it with me. And yeah, I'd be happy to catch up in the future. And yeah, and to talk about anything you want.
Yeah, pleasure was all mine. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that we have more conversations very soon, inshallah.
Inshallah. All right. Thank you again, and have a great week and get better.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.